All right, so welcome to the Boltz's birthday webinar. He is 7 years old today, and we have a different birth date for him than Luna because they were, even though they were raised together and they were integrated into the pack together from different facilities actually, and so we raised them together, and Luna's birthday is March 25th, and so I would like to start this webinar by sharing my desktop and featuring a little bit about Boltz's history. And so what you're going to see is my screen, and I'm going to start with some video from the time he was a pup, and we're going to try to see if I can incorporate a little bit of narrative about what we have experienced in the last 7 years. So Boltz is a representative of the Minnesota subspecies, which we call the nubilis subspecies, or Great Plains subspecies. He came to us as a pup that was about a month of age when we acquired him, and that's a little bit older than we typically like to deal with. We usually like to work in the neonate stage to have the strongest bond, so kind of explains a little bit of why Boltz is a little bit more reserved. So you can see he's very well developed, still socialized. The place where we acquired him had worked with he and about 7 other pups in a area of their kitchen, and so they were around people. But when we socialize wolf pups, we immerse them 24/7 with humans in an environment that is exposed to the sights and sounds of the exhibit. We bring them up next to the fence line so that they can, experience their future pack mates, and they kind of live the life of the wolf center. And so I think sometimes the fear avoidance is quite a bit less from the wolves that we socialize during that critical bonding period, which is typically between about 10 days of age and 14 days of age is our desired socialization period. But so you can see here he's not skittish, he's not hiding, he's certainly enjoying some of the stimuli that we give them. But because he was a little bit more skittish, and actually really we had this dog because of Grizzer, who was retired by himself. We adopted Oscar in 2011. But we found that Oscar the dog was going to be helpful in 2012 with Boltz, because Boltz had a little bit of intimidation around people. He did not have intimidation at all around Oscar. So you can see the benefit of the dog in providing some social contact. And obviously having contact with the wolves outside is an important part as they experience howling bouts with their future pack mates. Yep, that's Aiden howling right with Boltz. Aiden was a great pack leader. Certainly showed a lot of social cohesiveness with those pups and interacting with them in a very protective way, feeding them. And as they got bigger, we then always introduced the pups into the exhibit pack around the time that they're about 3 months of age. And you can see here Boltz really food begging, doing a lot of appeasement behavior, rubbing under the chin towards Aiden, as well as Denali. Denali's not quite as engaging as Aiden. Again, Luna, we'll talk about her history. We have issues with her physical conditions that were concerning for us. When she was brought in, she did have that plate in her leg that she'd had since she was a month of age. But look at Boltz here. I wanted to share this with you. Boltz is like the perfect hip posture, and he still maintains that today. He is probably the best conformation of any wolf out there. He is straight line, meaning his hips are very straight, his legs are very straight. He's very agile. He's very mobile. He's got a really good body, overall conformation, and not that we care about how tall they are or anything like that. We're just concerned about their health. And so Boltz is probably the healthiest wolf out there. As a matter of fact, we kind of joke about what's Boltz's needs. Well, he doesn't have any. He doesn't have any medication. He's always just gotten a daily vitamin like everybody else. We remembered that he was over 6, and usually over 6 we start him on Cosequin. It's like, oh yeah, that's right. He's going to be 7. He should be on Cosequin. So we started him on Cosequin this winter. He actually doesn't really care for taking a lot of pills. He's definitely a little bit more gentle when it comes to taking things, a little bit more timid. Luna usually takes her pills pretty well, but from the time that they were young, it was always Luna who had the more pressing medical issues and the more physical, needs and things, and Boltz was just pretty much, we kind of reference him as the middle child. We forget sometimes that he has some issues. We'll talk a little bit. We are discovering one issue that we're going to have to really kind of take a look at, and that's his vocal cords. When he howls, he doesn't have a high pitch. But otherwise, Boltz's characteristic face, the eye stare, that's that fear avoidance behavior that I talk about that comes with weak socialization. You can see that intimidated look. That's a classic wolf look. That's what the wolves look like running around northern Minnesota. So when we look at, again, socialization, we're not domesticating these animals. Domestication is a process of, thousands of years of selection that changes the morphology, it changes the behavior, it changes the reproductive cycle. Dogs domesticated, they can reproduce any time of the year, 2 heat cycles a year. Wolves in captivity, wolves in the wild, they have 1 heat cycle. Males are only fertile during that time of the breeding season in February, and that's why things get a little bit ramped up. Even though we have spayed and neutered wolves here, they do get a little ramped up during the wintertime. This is Aiden and Boltz when Boltz was coming into his first year. Still, again, very submissive, to get a little bit more testing. Luna, because she was the only female in the exhibit, was dominant by default. So that was kind of a challenge for Boltz in that first year because, he had a pup mate who already had a history of being protected because when she was a month of age, her surgery precluded him from wrestling with her. Staff always stopped him if he was too hard on her because of her issues with her back right leg. So then he was always kind of stopped from being dominant. Then he joins a pack with males, and wolves have a gender-specific rank order, so he becomes the bottom of the male rank order while Luna becomes the top of the female order because she's the only female. And so that meant that Boltz was getting a lot of dominance and really, again, as the omega, if you want to use that term, as the bottom of the rank order, he was getting it from his pack mate, Luna, because she was the dominant female, and he was also getting it from Denali, who was the second ranking male. Aiden, not so much. Aiden was, he was such a great pack leader, but there was a time when, young youth and hormones are going to get in the way, and Boltz did, during a period of time when he was around 2, going on 3, try to initiate a challenge on Aiden. Now, Aiden took it pretty seriously, and he, as you can see here on the top of the photo, that's Aiden coming down on Boltz with a very hard muzzle bite, and it was over pretty quickly. But clearly it was in Boltz's nature to be more dominant. But it also was in Boltz's nature to become very social with new pups. And this is Grayson and Axel when they came in, and we were happy to see that Boltz was not threatening. He was actually quite playful with them, and certainly you kind of wonder if he missed something by having Luna as a pack mate, if he's reliving his puphood days. But it was great for us to see. We knew that Aiden was good with pups because we witnessed it when Boltz and Luna came in, but we weren't sure how Boltz was going to be, especially with some of that weaker socialization. But you can see here he was great with these pups, and this is again their first week in the exhibit. Classic weather issues. Anytime we do something in wolf care, it usually starts raining. So I think we better stop training in wolf care and start training in meteorology. But the reality is, wolves they aren't bothered by it. They've got their full, pelage. Their undercoat is just starting to grow in, but they've got their guard hairs, and that really protects them. So, like I said, we knew Aiden was caregiving, and there's Grayson pup with his Aiden. They had a very special bond, but Boltz and the pups had a bond as well. It was Denali that didn't have the greatest bond with the pups, and Denali was kind of hard on those pups coming in. But fortunately, they had Boltz, and even now, Boltz has that purpose where he kind of is that buffer to interact with the younger wolves and keep a little bit of stress off of the older wolves. Now, like I say, that didn't work with Aiden because Aiden had some issues where he was losing confidence and weakening, and everybody saw it, and that's just the natural process to take out some dominance. Denali, though, was the one who was kind of getting to the point where there was some antagonism, especially when the Arctics were younger. They kind of pushed on Denali, but then it was a matter of time before the deposing of the pack situation happened, and that was September of 2017 is when this started. And you can really see here that Boltz takes an active role, maybe some confidence with having the Arctics help support him, but Axel and Boltz take the role and the lead in deposing Aiden. And so you can see here, pretty hard circumstance to watch, but the challenge we had was that we couldn't just take Aiden out at this point without having a change in his psychological state about leading the pack. When we take an animal into retirement, we want to make sure that they're ready, and clearly Aiden wasn't ready to leave this pack. It took quite a while. As a matter of fact, this was September. We didn't retire him out until July, and I can certainly talk about that in Aiden's birthday webinar to get more details on it. But you can see here that Boltz is part of it. Probably not the instigator. It was clearly Axel that was kind of pushing it, and Grayson's not either. Grayson's sniffing him because no doubt there's cortisol coming out of that body. There's probably some stress hormones, and maybe even an anal scent gland expression there with that kind of intense focus. But Denali wasn't part of it, and Grayson wasn't part of it, but Axel was. And Axel was a tail puller from the time he was young, so it doesn't surprise me at all that that's his go-to move when he wants to try to get something. He'd been doing that since he was a pup. A lot of people thought it was cute as a pup, but it's certainly not cute right now. So we lived through that. Like I said, Boltz was a big player in that. Boltz gained a lot of confidence, and I think a lot of it was because Boltz was creating some kind of bonds and some alliances with the Arctics. And what ends up happening sometimes when you have 2 or 3 against 1, that's when it gets more problematic. So like I said, the scenario playing out here is ritualized dominance, but in this case, it was also the start of deposing of the dominant pack leader. So we used a lot of distractions, but at some point, what we find with these ritualized dominants, if we stop them and stop them and stop them, what ends up happening is the tensions build and build and build to the point that they're very problematic and could be lethal. So we always had a trained staff on what's the best way to be able to counteract or change this kind of dynamics. So as you can see here, winter comes. We still have some tension, some very slow walking tension, but we don't want to pull Aiden out that day because, again, he wasn't ready. It took a while. And also you'll notice Aiden has a suture mark there, has a history of discoid lupus, which is an autoimmune disorder, and then he comes out with these mast cells, which are histamine-based cells. Again, we don't know what causes them, if it's tied to immune systems, but we kind of had issues. So when Aiden was recovering, so it was November of 2017, he had those tumors removed. you could see here he's mentally kind of leaving the pack, and that's creating a scenario where Boltz and Denali and the Arctics are kind of pair bonding, and they're forming the pack around him. So again, that's an important part of the, the psychological kind of component. And so we needed this pack to move on, and we needed Aiden to move on mentally to not be a pack leader, so that when he went into retirement, he would be calmer. So by spring, this is the where we got him, is tolerant, and avoiding a lot of interactions. The pack had moved on, so they weren't focusing on him as much, and that allowed them to be, in close proximity with each other, and actually Boltz even lying next to Aiden without pressuring him. It's because of Aiden losing his kind of confidence, and really Boltz gaining his confidence as well. So February 2018, by April, it was pretty clear that things were over for Aiden. Although one thing that we did that does happen is that you kind of get a little resurgence of some hormones around April, and then prolactin hormone, kind of the more nurturing hormone, kicks in, kind of towards May. So usually those cold mornings in spring, it ramps everybody up. And in this case, Aiden started to get a lot of confidence when wolf care staff were in. And the secondary problem that we had is that Boltz has a bee phobia. So as soon as the insects started coming out and Boltz started to get his kind of, oh my God, a bee's over my head, then he loses confidence, and then Aiden started picking things up. So we certainly didn't want a circumstance where, we're going to go back to Aiden as pack leader. We had gone through the deposing of him, and it wasn't going to be, it was clear that was over in the minds of the wolves, that Aiden was no longer the leader, and they were looking for another leader. But we still had to deal with his bee phobia with Boltz. So we worked on that, and we came up with some creative ideas thanks to some of our longtime members and wolf care supporters. We started desensitizing him with some bubbles. Turns out they sell a bubble machine, and they sell bacon bubbles. And so we started to kind of desensitize him to these flavored bubbles that we could float around his head, and he could bite into them, and they tasted like bacon. Well, I don't know what they tasted like. I didn't taste one, but it had some results, and so that was a good thing for us to see. We still have an issue with it. We just don't know how it's going to be this year, but we'll try to kind of keep that in mind, and it's all part of Boltz's more timid personality trait. So it's certainly something that we're kind of dealing with. So anyways, so fast forward, Aiden gets retired in July, and he has a great retirement. Certainly does pretty well. Going into retirement shows really no fence biting, no anxiety, no issues that he used to have being separated from the pack. It was clearly the right move to let him be deposed. So then we have a pack of 4 starting the winter of 2018. Boltz started doing some really interesting appeasement behavior. So he was doing a lot of licking and grooming, and the other wolves liked it. So we're not certain if Boltz is in a leadership role. Actually, we think right now the leadership is probably Denali, just because of age. But Axel here is really kind of pushing things. So we're definitely in that circumstance of watching this progress, and we'll likely not see anything until the 2020 pups come in. And go back to the birthday boy, and we'll just talk about his life. So Boltz was a little bit older, and one thing I want to just kind of add also, sorry about that, is when I do the archive, I will include the video because, that's one of the benefits of watching this, and even if you're not a subscriber, I'll send you the archive linked. But Boltz came to us in 2012. Typically when we work with pups, we want to try to work with neonates, and neonates are pups are between the ages of about 10 to 14 days of age. So it's right around the time their eyes are open that helps us to maximize their socialization, their tolerance towards captive exhibits. All of our wolves are born in captivity. We don't breed here, so we adopt wolves every 4 years. But the winter of 2012 was quite a bit different than other winters. We had a lot of extremely warm weather. Oh, now Boltz's video is there. Is a puppy. He's whining in the background. And pack is howling to him. So I'm going to just close that window so that doesn't get everybody riled up. But basically, the situation that we had with Boltz was that he was older than average. The winter was certainly earlier whelping periods than we've ever experienced with captive wolves in northern Minnesota. And so typically wolves are born in April and into May. But Boltz and Luna, both litters, which came from facilities in Minnesota, had a March whelping date. And when we go back to the breeding season, which is typically in late February, mid to late February into March, up in the Arctic, but here in Minnesota, between mid to late February, with a 63-day gestation period, we would find that that winter we had an unusually warm January. I recall, events of rain in January where we were sun pumping the wolf yard. We were, drawing, normally that's snow, but that winter possibly, and we don't really know, but possibly the warmer weather may have ramped up or stimulated the breeding season to be earlier. And then 63 days later, we have litters in March. And so it wasn't just our facility. We had talked to a lot of other facilities that experienced early whelping periods. So not just the wolves that we had committed to adopting, but other places had that as well. So what that meant for us is when we met Boltz, he was about 30 days of age. And again, when I play that video, you'll see that, his body posture is very, very developed. And so typically when we get wolf pups, in that neonate stage, they're very kind of keyed into the people. They're, seem to be, again, needing the human component a little bit more. As a matter of fact, in the neonate stage, they don't even have the ability to urinate and defecate without stimulation. And so we're typically doing all of those things that a mother would do. Mother wolves will lick and to encourage urination and defecation, and also that licking helps creates a social bond, but also helps keeps the den area clean. And so in a circumstance with Boltz, he was way beyond that. He was, like say, about a month of age, very agile, but also very fear avoidant. And so Boltz has what we call a weak socialization. He's not as readily willing to approach wolf care handlers. He certainly has a circumstance where he is, to some extent, a little bit more of a challenge to manage because we don't get hands-on with them. And we are fortunate that he's an extremely healthy young boy. Going on 7, has had no medical issues, no circumstances that would warrant us to feel like, there was something that was needed to be done that we couldn't get done. So we do vaccinate them. It is a challenge to vaccinate them. Every wolf here is vaccinated with rabies on an annual basis, and then also the 5-way vaccination. And the way that I get Boltz vaccinated is typically with a rally, where I get Denali all excited, and Denali comes over and is greeting me, and Boltz gets excited, so he greets Denali, and then next thing you know, I come up behind him, and we do a subcutaneous injection. So that means we lift the skin under his neck and then inject the needle and inject him. So that works out fairly well. It may take me, a month to get 2 vaccines in him because it takes a while to practice them. One of the things that we don't do is we don't, cause the wolves anxiety by kind of sitting on them or forcing them into anything. Everything is done kind of on their terms when they, feel that they're willing to accept the handling. So that's real important to us. So like I said, as a young pup, Boltz was a little bit neophobic, kind of concerned about new things. We see that into adulthood with him. He certainly has some issues with, handlers, like I said, but also strange things happening around the exhibit. And what Boltz has done is that he's kind of turned that into a little bit of a challenge. As Aiden was retired and he tries to move up in rank, he gets anxious about certainly being in a leadership position or taking on, kind of a more dominant position. And then he ends up in a circumstance where that anxiety is viewed as weakness. And we can see that especially the young Arctic wolves will kind of sometimes mob them a little bit, overwhelm them a little bit. So that's a piece of, hopefully something that we can help him overcome. But like I said, it's really a part of weak socialization from the time that he's been younger. And we, know that with wolves, those early critical bonding days, what we call the critical social bonding period in the first 3 months, is where we really try to immerse them in all kinds of things that are strange or overwhelming. And obviously, you know, at a 7-year-old, we're not going to try to, you know, kind of circumvent that or try to overcome that. So like I said, you saw a little bit of scuffling if you're watching prior to me starting. We do have a birthday pig's ear treat for him. That's been a treat for just about everybody. It's hard to get Boltz just a birthday treat because of the competition, and that's Axel and Grayson there, and looks like Axel on the left, Grayson on the right there, and Denali is also kind of a big player in that competition. We're getting temperatures that are warming, but they're freezing at night, so we're not losing a lot of snow. We had obviously some rain that was causing some real significant melt, but now we're kind of in a slow down period where it's just getting above freezing during the day, and then by this time of the night, it's cooling off, and we're going to see this snow kind of continue to stay for quite a bit. One thing that has been interesting is the Vermilion Community College students, my ethology class, started their data observation period, and they did a preliminary data period about 2 weeks ago, and they mentioned something about Boltz always seeming to, when he's resting, kind of being in the curl rest throughout this winter. Meaning that, you know, granted, it's just a small subset of data, so by no means it means it's always resting like that. But a curl rest typically means that they're having challenges with the ambient temperatures, and so that means that they're a little bit colder, where they curl up their body and tuck their, you know, body closer, their legs and their tail closer into their bellies. So he's on a side rest right now, so that's kind of good because, like I said, out of the, you know, 10 hours of observations that they did, 100% of his time was curl rest this winter. So I think one of the things for Boltz too is that he does not have a very thick winter coat. If you look at the Arctics and even Denali, well, they seem to have a much different pelage, much longer, much more developed. And one thing I did notice about Boltz this winter is he really put on a lot of hair on his feet. This was an unusually cold stretch of winter that we had here, with some temperatures 40 below, which is characteristic of northern Minnesota in the old days, meaning we used to have that on a regular basis. But in recent decade, we probably haven't had that kind of extreme winter like we have this winter with some strong wind chill. So it's certainly made for kind of a challenge for him. So I think, like I said, we'll deliver the pig's ears as their treat for today, and then we'll kind of talk a little bit more about some of the competition issues going on. And can you radio to Kelly? Okay. And yes, and then one of the other things I wanted to mention too is Boltz has been having some issues with his throat with howling. We've been talking about that since last summer. We thought that he had maybe, you know, we weren't certain if he got stung by something or if he had a circumstance where, you know, there was some other kind of problem with him. And sometimes that can happen, you know, but in this case, it still is an issue where he's lost his ability to have really high pitches when he howls. So there's three kind of scenarios that could happen, two unplausible for our scenario. One would be repetitively using his voice and losing it because he's raspy, which, you know, dogs may get from repetitively barking. That's not typical of our wolves. As a matter of fact, Grayson's the only one that does a bark howl threatening towards people. The second would be is if there's some kind of physical restraint on his neck that would cause some abrasions, say a dog pulling on a leash. Sometimes they can get hoarse from that response. And then the third, and again, that's not very plausible here because he doesn't have a leash. It could happen if somebody was pinning him by the neck or holding him down, and that doesn't usually occur. Most of the dominance is squashes where they roll over on each other. But the third circumstance is definitely a concern for us, and that is maybe some kind of a growth on the voice box that's causing that restriction. So it's not a circumstance that warrants us taking him out right now. He can feed very well. He eats without any problems. Little competition there with that food, with that pig's ear. You can see his tail is tucked. We call that a T4 tail. There he goes. She's relaxing it now. So now it's called a T3.5 because it's down. It's not tucked between his legs, but it's down and it's touching his haunches. So that means he's not all that comfortable with the circumstance. We just fed a deer carcass yesterday. The staff, Kelly was on for feeding, Kelly Godfrey, and they wheeled in a deer. Also, we fed some extra liver. We gave a few other things just to try to get Grayson a little bit more stimulated at a carcass, and it seemed to work pretty well. Grayson was on the carcass with Denali and Axel and ate for about 30 minutes, which was good. Grayson's been not eating as well, and so having a little bit different stimuli meant that they rolled on the deer as well. But they ate pretty well, and then Boltz usually doesn't have too much problem getting his food resources from Denali. Denali is the big kind of the big wolf here on the left and the big player when it comes to food defense. So like I said, that the throat issue is something that if we need to, certainly, obviously, if an animal needs medical care, we will. But one of the things that we have to always consider is that isolation from the pack can mean that his rank is then closed up. They could treat him as a disperser and not let him back in. I know there's been some research. I've never had any issues with it, but there's been some research from other facilities that even just a short 2-hour vet visit could be enough to change the rank issues. So whenever we do a wolf immobilization where we have to have them as part of the pack or have to remove them from the pack, we will typically hold the entire pack in holding, recover that wolf who had the surgery in the main exhibit, and then slowly let the other pack members out. It's definitely a lot more concerning with a pack leader, like when we did Shadow or when we did Aiden's 2 surgeries when he was in there, we were able to successfully do it. But for Boltz, given the fact that he's so timid in personality, I certainly don't want to create a scenario where he's, definitely compromised and then looking weak and then becoming a little bit more prone to some of the dominance from the other wolves. So we do have to immobilize the entire pack prior to the 2020 pups arrival on site. Typically what we do is we do a complete blood panel for all the wolves, make sure that everybody's healthy before we bring any adopted pups to our site. So because pups are quite a bit more vulnerable, so we want to make sure that there's no issues going on with the pack. So we know that we can plan for that immobilization next April, and time's certainly important. April is a little bit at the tail end of some of this winter dominance, with the idea that the pups arrive in May, but that gives us a little bit of time to be able to make sure that we can get everybody back in, and if there is a medical issue, we can address it before the pup's arrival. So that's typically when we do it. We also look at ambient temperatures. So typically by April, we're going to get warmer days and be able to address it. So someone had asked why Aiden needed surgery. I do apologize, and I kind of get to the point where I forget that maybe people are not all familiar with everything going on with our facility. Aiden was our pack leader from 2011 until just 2018 when we did retire him. In 2017, we started to see some growths on his leg that were pretty fast growing and kind of concerning. They were very irritating to him, so he's licking, biting, and we decided one was June 2017, during a calmer time of the year, we decided to risk the immobilization and take him to the vet clinic and figure out what it was. It turns out it was mast cell growths. Basically, mast cells are histamine-based cells that seem to pop up throughout the body. They were removed successfully. He recovered pretty well. And then in November of 2017, they came back. And so we risk it again during a much more tense time of the year. So wolves typically, even in a non-producing pack like ours, where we don't reproduce wolves because we spay and neuter, the rank order issues increase during the natural breeding season, and that's February is when the height of the breeding season is. So even though you're neutered or spayed, there are still other rank-related hormones that are present in wolves during this time of the year. So even though it was later in the season, we felt it necessary to have them removed. And so we did in November of 2017, both times taking the pack out, recovering Aiden within the pack, and then slowly working the pack back in. And it worked quite well until Aiden started to have some other issues just from age and from the maturing of the Arctic. So he was then tested during that winter, and then we retired him out in July of 2018. Since then, he had another reoccurring bout of mast cells on February 5th of this year, where we just completed surgery with him. Unfortunately, this time, and both tumors or both sets of circumstances in 2017 were growths that were removed with clean margins. That means the entire tumor was removed, and obviously they grew back. That's how mast cells are. And then this one in February, unfortunately, wasn't so good. It was in the muscle, so it was not a complete removal. And so ever since that second mast cell surgery, Aiden's been on some antihistamines and allows him to, that tries to counteract those mast cells. It occurs on dogs. Certainly not certain what the reasoning is, and certain breeds are more prone to it. This was our first experience with it with captive wolves, and I started working here with wolves in 1989, and we'd never had that before except with Aiden. Now, Denali has the same type of growth, although his is not expanding. So Denali's is certainly concerning. He's on antihistamines as well. But his are just like about the size of a pea, and have been that way for several months, actually probably almost a year now, with no reoccurring issue. So there's a lot of details about stress that are kind of an important player in this. And Aiden had also in 2011, yeah, I think it was around 2011, he was diagnosed with discoid lupus, which is an autoimmune disorder. So I hope that we have a circumstance where this last treatment or this last removal doesn't come back. We have now gone through a little bit more aggressive treatment in an or an immune suppressant. So he's on a 1-month trial of prednisone to see if we can try to curb that immune system and try to knock that out a little bit. So like I said, last night we fed a deer. So that's Grayson with the deer head, which was a pretty prized possession for Denali this morning. When I did a scat collection this morning, Denali was carrying that around and was pretty proud of it, whereas now Grayson has it. So one of the reasons why we do feed large carcasses, and you see a lot of hides and things around here, it stimulates the wolves mentally, in addition to fitting with their physical protocol. So what I mean by physical protocol is that wolves have a physiology that allows them to gorge and to eat, 20%, they estimate 20% of their body weight at one given time. So they have these stomach receptors that allow them to consume and consume and consume, because in the wild, they may make a kill and they may not make another kill for, 10 to 14 days. And so it varies. I mean, wolves are opportunistic predators. They certainly can kill more frequently, but if you look at the percentage rate on success of kills, it does vary with a lot of things. It varies with time of year. It varies with snow conditions. Right now, we're entering a snow condition that is very good for wolves, meaning that these nighttime, like this morning, it was 0 degrees here, Fahrenheit. And so the temperatures at night, freezing, means that they can walk on top of these snow banks and can run across the top of the snow, whereas deer will fall through. Their pointed hooves kind of fall through them. So it's been a little challenging, I think, for the wolves this winter as well, because same with deer, we had a really dry snow. It didn't pack very well, and it was pretty deep. And so I think a lot of animals were falling through the snow. Now that it's crusted, it definitely turns the scale towards the predator versus the prey. Also, the concern is people who have dogs that are not attended, meaning dogs that are just living in the country and allowed to run, can also run deer. In my neighborhood, I heard 4 dogs yesterday chasing some deer, and this is not a great circumstance for the deer, because dogs don't care, if they don't catch a meal, whereas wolves might test their prey, and if they aren't successful, they'll stop and they'll test something else. Whereas dogs will run for the fun of it because they don't need the food resource. So they're not balancing their calorie output with a calorie input. So it's real problematic. So here's a demonstration of Boltz telling Axel that it is his pig's ear and it's his birthday and he needs to stay away. So what we see about, again, food possession is different than rank. And so it's okay that Boltz, you know, may be on a lower ranking posture or trajectory from Axel, but Axel does respect that space around his, about a foot usually around his face, that he's going to kind of respect that and back off. I'm pretty sure that's Denali's pig's ear that he went and got. Denali got up and left. Something distracted him up the hill. And so Boltz is pretty quick to be able to go find it and get it. So I'm glad the birthday boy is hanging out here. And so I have a question from Anna. How do you think each of these wolves will respond when new wolf pups are introduced to the pack? Is there any way to guess that based on their personalities? That's a great question. I would say that we have already previous experience with wolf pup introduction with Denali, who's up in the woods there, and with Boltz. Boltz is extremely engaging with wolf pups. He seems to like to play with them, get them kind of on his level, whereas Denali is a little bit harder. Denali, as a matter of fact, has had a lot of history with Grayson. When Grayson first came in, Denali was quick to pick on the weaker of the two pups and show a little bit more, kind of overt dominance towards them. So that's a challenge that we have if Denali is still in the exhibit pack when the pups come. We need to definitely watch that. Denali is going to be 11 on April 27th. That's the oldest we've ever had as far as a wolf staying in the exhibit pack. Usually by now they're retired, which I'm not saying I hope, but I suspect that Denali will probably be retired before the 2020 pups come, but it's his life, it's his terms. You know, if he is able to maintain himself and have no issues, he'll pretty much stay. Grayson, who's carrying the deer here and about to do a little bit of posturing towards Denali, you can see his hackles went up and he's walking real slow there. That's Denali's prize, and the fact that Grayson has it, it's kind of a classic wolf social dynamic thing where they posture around and they they have the ability to stay there and guard something, but they choose to kind of lord over the other wolves to prove that they've got something. So for Grayson, who's been at kind of at the bottom of the rank order when it comes to feeding, it is good to see that he's got the prized possession, is able to deal with it there. So one thing we see about Grayson, he's got a lot of the traits of Aiden at that age. So Aiden was our former pack leader. Grayson seems to be very aware of what's going on. Certainly he's, like I said earlier, he's the only one who's bar calling to ward off, strangers, to respond to strangers, respond to strange environments, and that type of thing. That's a pretty telling, in our experience, characteristic of a wolf that's got more personality trait towards pack cohesiveness, I guess is probably the best way to put it. So just in my experience with the way I see Grayson interact, I suspect he's going to be a lot like Aiden in having a very strong caregiving response. The other thing that we are definitely benefited by is the fact that prolactin hormone is a natural occurring hormone. If you get a chance, I have the highlights, the Ambassador Wolf highlight DVD available in the store. You get a chance to watch it and you'll be able to see every introduction, every time we brought wolf pups up to the fence, you see this incredible salivation. We've actually had Shadow Pack Leader and Aiden both regurgitate when the pups are first brought to the fence. So we try to bring them to the fence when they're in that neonate stage, as long as the weather is good and they're not too cold. We bring them pretty much within a day or two of their arrival on site. At the very least, I take one of their puppy blankets and I bring it into the exhibit so that they can smell that the pups are here. The presence of the pups certainly gives them, it seems to create a stimulus within the endocrine cycle of prolactin. And we've had some really excessive salivation, again, just some intense hormonal response with the presence of the pups. And then the time of the year, they get very, very caregiving through the fence. Matter of fact, Aiden was in a circumstance where he actually would bring food over to Luna and Boltz when they were young pups and try to feed them through the fence in addition to some regurgitation. So we time our wolf pups every 4 years, and Tammy asks, how big can the retired pack be? And we have 3 areas for retirement, so we're capable of maintaining 2 packs, but it's not my preference. We don't have a lot of land over there, so we're right at the edge of our property boundary, so I can't really expand the retirement area any bigger. And it actually is quite good for the animals that we have by having 3 different areas, because by the time you're retired, you're typically a little bit more sedentary, a little bit more slowed down. And then as we are like with Grizzer, we have a circumstance where his vision is kind of decreasing. And so with the retired pack, we want to make sure that it's small enough that they can memorize it or they can be familiar with it and not so overwhelmed by this more dominant forest cover that's in the exhibit pack. So like Grizzer, and we had a circumstance with Mackenzie, a previous retiree, who both had some vision issues, and that's hard. So we want to keep the retirement very similar, easy to manage, try to keep it so it's not a challenge for them to be able to maneuver if they do get into older circumstances. So so with that said, it's more about, I'd say probably 4. I think we've would 4 or 5 in retirement we could manage, but the issue is about compatibility, and Boltz is demonstrating there a little bit of roll on back there, and it's kind of a scent roll, but also a little bit of probably just some relaxation. Certainly, it's a good day to be able to have a pig's ear that nobody competes, that you don't compete with. So, and again, you can see the snow is pretty crusty there, and I've got a great opportunity to look at his feet. And also, if you look at his coat, just not as thick as you would find with the other wolves. So he's got you can see why a curl resting might be a part of his kind of personality. So in a circumstance where we have, like I say, with a compatibility, right now we have some history with Denali and Grizzer, so it precludes us to put those 2 together because they had some antagonistic relationship that was difficult and may continue into retirement. So at this point, I'm not, I'm happy that Denali's able to stay in, because I really don't want to put him with Grizzer, and that would mean that I need to separate out retirement. And Denali's compatible with Luna, he's compatible with Aiden, but just not in the best interest of Grizzer to be able to manage that. So like I said, we are at the end of our property boundary, so we really can't build anymore. And as a matter of fact, in this exhibit, you'll find areas where they don't even use, and you can kind of see up on top of the hill there, there's snow that's not trampled. There's part of this enclosure they don't even travel in. The reality is size is not nearly as critical to the exhibit pack as protection from being surrounded. You know, they get intimidated when there's people behind them. We have no viewing from the back, but sometimes people walk up in the back because they can get around the back of the enclosure. So one thing I'm going to probably try to work on is getting some physical wood barrier fences to try to keep people away. The other thing is that up on top of our hill, we try to give them some high vantage points. Typically when they're upset about something, they run to the top of the hill and they want to look down at something. So that's an important part of our component, making sure that we have a lot of rocks for them to climb, that type of thing. So I think it's again, our biggest challenge is not so much size of enclosure, but just making sure that things are maintained in a quiet manner for them so that they don't feel overwhelmed by things. Now we've got a facility issue with our roof. The main exhibit roof may need to be repaired in the upcoming year. I asked them that they do it before the pups arrive, because I certainly don't want to add some stress that is redirected. So here we have a little bit of posturing. I can kind of talk about Boltz, like say trying, that's Axel doing what we call obnoxious submission. And Boltz is a little bit uncertain about a wolf that's kind of rolling over and trying to, submit to him when that wolf usually doesn't. So certainly the presence of the camera, and also they keep going over to the left side, and that's a 4-leg stab there from Boltz. usually, again, a social engagement. It's not antagonistic. He's got a little hackles on his neck because nobody trusts Axel when he comes up, because Axel is kind of jumpy. Axel likes to test and certainly pushes his limits sometimes. So those of us who work with Axel are always mistrusting of what he's really up to. So he's a little bit of a hackle there on his neck and back at his rump. So we call it H1. Actually H2, H3, so mid-back and on his rump, put out on his tail, and it's wagging. So certainly wagging of a tail. Some of the ethologists say that a tail wag, a really short tail wag that's fast, is typically a conflict where they try to decide whether they should stay or whether they should go, but usually it's arousal of some kind, and certainly wolves are social animals, so it's definitely a circumstance where having, Axel submit to you definitely for Boltz means that somebody sees him as higher ranking, so that's kind of arousing to them. So to get back to Tammy's question, we are not likely, we just don't have any space to add to the facilities, but I think we have more important issues. Like I say, space has not really been the limitation. It's been, making sure that we have enough wolf care to do, the amount of hours that we need to be able to satiate every wolf. So that's been a little bit of a challenge, make sure we have enough training, enough people in the enclosures to give the wolves the social interactions that they need. That's probably our biggest priority. So Maureen comments that about a month ago during wolf care, Grayson actually performed an RLU. We were pretty excited about that. And yeah, no doubt, everybody gets excited when Grayson gets a little bit more dominance because he's had such a tough time since Aiden's retirement. Grayson was very bonded to Aiden, the pack leader. And certainly it's been a challenge for him. He had a tough winter. He lost quite a bit of weight. He's down to 83 pounds right now, which is the same pattern that he had last winter. So we give Grayson extra treats whenever we can, extra chicken, extra beef. That's why we're so excited that he had 30 minutes on the carcass. When we greet him, you might notice that we try to scratch him underneath his chin. This is Axel here, but if we were greeting Grayson, we try to go under his chin and try to scratch under his chin so that we can kind of pump up his head so we get his head up and feeling a little bit more comfortable. There's many times I even lift up his tail to try to get him to feel a little bit more confident. We have to be mindful as well that we're not favoring him over the other wolves. This morning when I came in to greet, Grayson's pretty mouthy, vocal, I shouldn't say mouthy, but he howls quite a bit when he's kind of got some anxiety. And so when I came in this morning, he was kind of mouthy and a little bit talkative to me. And immediately Denali comes over. Chris Denali was guarding the head, but immediately Denali comes over and starts to assert some dominance over him. And so that was something that I needed to watch because they were all four of them were next to me trying to interact. So Denali's got a little blood on his face. He looks like he might have been digging in the carcass there. So Denali's our oldest wolf. He is going to be 11. Yes, we know you've been eating deer. So he's going to be 11 on April 27th. Like I said, that's the oldest we've had, but you can see he maintains himself quite well. He and Axel have a strange relationship of posturing. Axel has had a lot of favors from Denali, had a lot of protection from Denali, has been allowed to do a lot of things that Grayson hasn't. And so each wolf has their own circumstance, their own relationship that makes them a little bit of a personality driven, but also circumstance driven. And so that's why when Grayson gets one up on somebody else, we're pretty happy for him because he doesn't always get that because Denali's pretty heavy handed or heavy pawed on Grayson sometimes. But so Tahiti asked, what is the reason to bring in pups every 4 years? Does it have anything to do with the Chinese zodiac where every 4 years are harmonious and usually get along with each other? I would like to commit to the fact that I'd be that organized, but I'm not. So the 4-year rotation is about overpopulation and retirement. So it started with our circumstance, and we are celebrating 30 years of captive wolves here at the facility. I started in 1989. As a matter of fact, Memorial Day weekend, 30 years ago, was the first time we had wolves on site here. We had a litter of pups that was here in 1989, 1990, and 1991. And then in 91, I flew one of them out to Idaho to work with Jim Dutcher's project called The Wolf Return of a Legend. And then in 92, the new building was built. So we were temporary in 89, 90, and 91, where we took the wolves in the wintertime to my house. And every time that we came back, the wolves were less and less thrilled with being at the center because they didn't really acclimate to that. It wasn't their permanent home. And it was kind of challenging. So we knew early on that we were going to try to find alternatives for those wolves. And so in 93, when we opened the grand opening, that's when we had Mackenzie, Lakota, Lucas, and Kiana as the grand opening. And so even though 93 is kind of the center's official permanent grand opening for the exhibit, we did manage a part-time exhibit from 89 and up until 93. So for me, it's 30 years of being involved with the Wolf Center, either as a curator or some kind of a consultant. And I did go to Idaho for a period, just for a winter, to help with that project and kind of wrap up that project there. But in the case of the exhibit, like I say, the pattern was 89 litter, and then we started with new pups in 93, and there we had 4 pups at that time, and we didn't do anything from the standpoint of adding any pups in that first kind of set of wolf pups. In other words, we had 4 litter mates, 3 females, 1 male. They kind of just aged together. By the time they were 7, you know, the kind of the reality was, you know, these wolves are kind of getting old. We got to figure out how we're going to bring in new life. And so in the year 2000, we brought in Shadow Malik, who were Arctic pups in the year 2000. Well, what we learned at that time was that the existing pack was 7. By the time the Arctic pups got to their 2-year-old age structure, which is, you know, in humans, you call it the terrible twos. In wolves, you call it the terrible twos. The reality was, by the time the Arctics got to be 2, they were so hard on those older animals, those 7-year-olds, that they just deposed the entire social group. So Shadow Malik, in 2002, in fall of 2002, Mackenzie, Lakota, and Lucas were already deposed. And Kiana had passed away from a heart condition in I think it was 1998. So it was just the 3 of the other ones and then 2 of the Arctics. And so that's when we decided, okay, we can't wait for 7 years. We have to get pups in when the pack that's going to meet them is going to be younger. And so that's when we switched to a 4-year age structure, was in 2000. So basically 2002, 2000 was Shadow Malik. And then 2004 was Grizzer, Maya, and Nisa. 2008 was Aiden and Denali. 2012 was Boltz and Luna. 2016 was Axel and Grayson. And that's the rotation that we stay on. So it doesn't have anything to do with any kind of sign. It just was the best pattern. And then the other thing that we recognized while we switched to that pattern was that Boltz takes on a role of a middle-aged wolf who can still kind of play with the younger ones and divert some of the excess energy of young testosterone or estrogen-driven young adults who are sowing their oats, and they can sow their oats with the middle-range wolf and not so much pick on the older wolf. Now, that was kind of our plan, and it works actually quite well. It works for Denali. There's several places, and if my video would work, you would see it, where Denali just lays there and watches the young ones, you know, kind of run around and run amok, and he's not involved in it. Now, it didn't work for Aiden, and that's because Boltz was helping to test Aiden. And so that was more rank-driven, whereas we're not kind of in a scenario of rank-driven behavior just right now. So I think that seems to work well for us. Now that's the pattern that we use. And like I say, in 4 years of retirement, typically if they retire by 10, which is typically the age of retirement, with the exception of Luna, if they retire by 10, we typically have mortality between that 14 and 15 year age structure. So as a matter of fact, Grizzer, whose birthday is May 5th, in his webinar, he'll be 15. The oldest wolf we ever had here was Lakota, who passed away at 15 and a half. So Grizzer is about to enter his 15th year. He's doing great. As a matter of fact, when we broadcast from Luna, next week, you'll see Grizzer there, I hope, if Grizzer wants to come out, because he's got 3 different areas he can be. But Grizzer's doing quite well for a 15-year-old. As a matter of fact, we have more issues with a 7 and 11-year-old in retirement than we do with the 50-year-old right now. So that's kind of where we're at, and that's why we chose that. So again, and that's the cycle that will stay. The other thing you'll notice, if you're not familiar with our facility, was we do try to educate. Our job is education. Our job is not breeding. Our job's not, here to try to, release wolves in the wild. Every wolf we have here is in captivity. Our mission is education. As a matter of fact, it's illegal to introduce, as you may know, if you're following wolves in the national media and about wolf management. Delisting has occurred in the western U.S., and that's where Denali and Aiden's subspecies, they're the northwestern subspecies. Minnesota may likely see delisting here in the Midwest. So those subspecies are not releasable in the wild. The only subspecies that had been releasable in the wild were red wolves and Mexican wolves, and neither one of those are subspecies that we maintain here. So we have 3 out of the 5 subspecies in North America. We have the Northwestern, we have the Great Plains, and we have the Arctic. And so every 4 years, we also rotate subspecies. So in 2020, we're slated to reintroduce the Northwestern subspecies, which is Aiden and Denali's represented subspecies. So that's kind of the plan next year. So we'll be getting there hopefully soon. And with a more detailed plan, we are in the process of reviewing some possible source candidates and looking at medical records and USDA records right now. So Tammy also asked, are you seeing any change in behavior with the warmer weather? We are definitely seeing definitely more calming behavior, less of this kind of ramped up. So even that little posturing that you saw there, a month ago, that would have been a lot more biting, a lot more hackles. And that's why, like say, Boltz, I think, was a little mistrusting. But you see a lot of tail wagging, a lot of, it's that time of the year. The winter is kind of coming to the end. The winter hormones are coming to the end. That was just a quick little drive-by. Boltz did to Denali, said, hey, how you doing? Wagged his tail and kind of went off. And so we're seeing a lot more social behavior, certainly a lot more rest, and we're going to likely to start to see a little bit more nocturnal behavior. The ravens are going to start nesting here pretty quick. So we're going to see a little bit of dynamics even in the interactions with ravens in the enclosure. So right now in the background, you see ravens feeding on the deer carcass that Denali was just eating on. And that changes a little bit of the dynamics. Like I said, when the ravens are active, they get pretty nervy. And they, I think earlier this, I can't remember if I played it in February's webinar, but I have a clip of the ravens like pulling Denali's tail and, just kind of pushing their luck when it comes to wolves. That's going to slow down too. So not just the wolves are we going to see it, but also with the ravens as well. So that's something that we changed. So Robert asked, have Axel or Grayson ever rolled onto their side for you and in a submissive posture? So let me just kind of explain. So with wolf care staff, we do try to work with wolves in a submissive posture. That's important for, any human that works with them. If we are inherently dominant just because of our height, our eyes are up tall. And so therefore we're in a circumstance where we're, just by our mere presence, we're tall. That's why it's concerning when Axel jumps on me, because he's testing me. He's trying to get his eyes up towards mine. And so I just, we don't push them off. We just try to divert them. And a lot of times I try to bend over to try to get a little bit closer to them. But I don't put the Arctics in a subordinate. I don't encourage them to submit. Again, we like to during the summer season, but in the winter season, I don't encourage them to submit because other wolves will come over and take advantage of them. So in the summer, there are times because the hormones are different. So there's less, again, testosterone, less kind of ramped up types of influences and much more calming, because prolactin hormone, even in the absence of pups, is still seasonal. It still cycles, again, starting usually in April into August. So once we see that, we do see them roll over and submit. Denali does when we do body work. But like I said, during the dynamics of the winter, I try not to get anybody to submit or put anyone in that position where they might be viewed as vulnerable by the other wolves. In retirement, we can kind of get away with it, although, you know, we have to be cautious because Luna and Aiden have some competition issues over staff. If I'm the only one in there with them, because we still have a circumstance where Aiden's not willingly allowing other staff. He only allows about 5 of us in there. And that's just how Aiden is. He was a former pack leader. He can decide who he wants to socialize with. And it is a little bit of a challenge. So that's hard when I'm by myself because Luna wants to greet, Aiden wants to greet. I'm trying to get Luna to go with staff in the vestibule. And since the surgery, that's been a little bit more challenging. So when Anna asked, when would you recommend visiting the center if we want to see the pups after they've entered the exhibit pack? No doubt, I think the exhibit pack is always more dynamic when the pups come in. I personally like September and October just because that cooler weather means they're much more active. The pups are growing in size. So the pups will typically reach about adult size by 6 months of age. And so when Grizzer came in, actually at 6 months, he was like 80 pounds. So Grizzer is a little bit of the exception to the rule. But they really start to try to find their way in the pack. We usually put them in the first week of August because we want to make best use of that prolactin hormone. If we wait too long, where the pups are too big, they may view them as a competitor, not as a pup. And so even though we share a fence line with them all, from May until, end of July, we do start to see a more competitive nature the bigger the pups are. If the pups get over 30 pounds, it becomes a little more problematic. So we usually put them in that August, but what ends up happening is August is hot. And so it's a real hardship for us in wolf care to rectify this with viewers. Everybody wants to come to the center, and I appreciate that people want to see the wolves, but it's hard to get them up. As a matter of fact, when the pups figure out that we have upper den tunnels, meaning over the years, and Lakota was probably the biggest digger of them all in 93 litter. There's tunnels, 20, 30 foot of tunnels on the top of the enclosure. Once the pups figure that out, then they go down in the tunnels. And then while we're open, it's really hard for us to get them up and around. So while we are still open to the public in August, as the temperature's cool, I'd say watch the weather. And as the temperature's cool in September, October, those are kind of the best times. So I'm going to just let you know, I hear some howling in the back. Boltz hears it as well. His ears are pricked and turned focused. I don't know who that is. I don't think it's one of ours. I think but it's going to trigger our wolves. So we'll stop and let them howl. So you can kind of see there again, Boltz doesn't have that ability for any high pitches. So I can see him mouthing, but nothing coming out. So that low throat is Grayson. That kind of monkey chatter is Luna. I'm not sure. I didn't see great. I didn't see. So you can see that rallying is a very social interaction and social behavior. So I think also I heard a little bit of barking, but that might be because Grayson's got a deer head here he's trying to manage. So Sue Stephenson had asked, does the physical limitations of captivity cause stress or social problems with the wolves? And I'm going to switch again back to my desktop, and I want to share with you something that we use on a regular basis, and this is the Canine Stress Dictionary. That's a great question. It is one of my biggest concerns. And again, like I say, you know, I've been in this facility as either a curator or a contractor since 1989. The biggest challenge I have is making sure that we're caring for the wolves to the best of our abilities, and stress is my biggest issue. And so I look at canine stress, and we are actually, I've read many publications about stress in the wild, and I think there's a few publications, and I'll try to find them and send them to you in the archive list. One of them on the stress of hunted populations, and you know, there's been cortisol studies of fecal cortisol studies that look at stress of populations that have a harvest season, which is obviously one of the components of this delisting. Other stress components are in the wild population is that they've actually seen evidence that the more dominant you are, the more stress you have. So lower ranking wolves don't have the work of having to bring down prey, having to, really defend territories, mark territories, that kind of thing in the wild. So here in captivity, obviously, we try to assess that. And I think we see a difference in rank. I think I see it in more dominant wolves. I think carry more stress from the standpoint of trying to guard their pack, protect their pack. I think Aiden, I saw with Aiden, I saw with Shadow, and to some extent, I see this with Grayson, which makes me think that there's more in this wolf's future. There's issues with him bark howling where other wolves don't have any response, but Grayson does. Shadow did. If you knew this facility, Aiden did. So always more conscientious about what's going on. Whereas here, in that circumstance, I think it might have been a wild wolf. It started off in the distance. I don't think it was any one of these guys, but I couldn't see where Axel and Grayson were, but I could hear I could hear Grayson's voice. Grayson has a very, very low-throated howl, and I could hear him barking. So I think there is something to be said about rank that makes them more keyed in to protecting their territory. But it is something that we train with our staff. I always want to be cognitive of what is stress. And this has been debated over and over and over again. We know stress. Anybody who's grown up around roadside zoos knows stress of animals constantly pacing, animals, self-mutilating, licking, chewing, etc. So I try to make sure that the wolf care staff really look for that. And I can't emphasize enough how just one little difference, okay, this wolf didn't eat today. Is it just because they don't feel well? Is it just because they're full? Is it because they don't like what we're serving? These wolves are a little bit more spoiled than the average wolf. We have a diet here of deer, of beaver. We have bison that we purchase. We purchase burger, the same burger that they serve to college students. And there are times when the wolves don't like that. And I'm like, college students eat this, man. You need to eat this. We buy them chicken. We just bought, a mix of chicken, pork, or pork and beef mix. So we do have a very diverse diet for them. But there are times, and one of the things that we know is stress can cause an appetite to shut down. And this is what concerns me with Grayson. I don't think Grayson's not eating, and we test him for parasites. We just tested both of them in this last week because I think Keith had emailed me about they were both butt scooting. And butt scooting is when you slide the butt across the ground. And it can be parasite driven. It also can be anal scent gland driven, and meaning that the anal scent glands are blocked. Both of them had a clean parasites or no parasites in their fecals. So I think when Grayson's not eating, it's about competition and stress. And so we watch that, and we have to train ourselves to know when do I, what is my behavior, or what's the behavior of the wolf, and how can I maybe modify where I feed, how I feed, what I feed. Those are all things that kind of go through my mind to try to make sure. So we look for this, and we have this canine stress dictionary. I think I've referenced it before, but as I watch them, and again, one of the great things about having my students watch them is this. I want to see these wolves in the absence of humans, the handlers. And if you watch our webcams, which we know are down, we're working on that. That's a bandwidth issue as well. But the issue of us being in there, we see a lot of competition. We see certainly Grayson, who is a little more needy. And that's one of the things that I see is in this idea of, a clingy wolf, stressed, and this is written for dogs, but we adapt it to wolves. Anybody who's leaning or clinging, seeking human contact for reassurance is often kind of showing some stress. So I see it, and I can try to address circumstances, but overall, this pack seems very compatible. It seems very, very relaxed. Like I say, we get a lot of roll on back. It's very hard to know what wolves think. And so we do the best we can to interpret by body language. And so by the fact, and the other thing that I look at is ears. And so if I go back to Boltz, so his ears are pricked and turned sideways. The most stressful thing probably going on right now is this camera. So we have a camera out there with a big lens that's staring at him through a gate. Well, eyeballs are, direct eye contact is intimidating. It's what they use to stare down each other. So that's probably the most stressful thing going on right now, is us even like doing this broadcast. We are hoping to do some initiatives coming up here where we have some mounted cameras that are like the webcams that'll have the ability to pan, tilt, and zoom. And again, we got to get this bandwidth fixed, because that's the biggest problem that we have is things are just too choppy to do really high quality, high res. But we've already installed a couple of these cameras, and we did some testing on them at a higher resolution, and we know that they're going to be good. So as soon as we can get more bandwidth and some kind of an initiative here, we'll hopefully switch to that. And what that means is that we won't have a human at the fence. We won't have this kind of, challenge about, a camera being facing them. We'll be able to pan, tilt, and zoom right from a mounted camera that's in a box that they don't really have to focus on. And so that's like I said, that's a way. Anytime I see stress, I always have to try to magnify or get into the mindset, what's causing that stress and how can I reduce it? So to long answer to your question, Sue, is yeah, I think it's always there. I think the reality is wolves are neophobic. They're not domesticated. They're not a dog. Even dogs have stress in when there's too many humans, too many things going on. So it's always part of my management strategy is to recognize it, to reduce it. That's why a lot of people ask, oh, can we go pet your wolves? Well, they don't know you. So why would I put them through that? Why would I have you walk in and interact with them? And I know other facilities do it because they condition wolves to do that, but I can't imagine Boltz, how he would feel if, we have 35,000 visitors a year and everybody got to go pet him. I just can't even imagine what his life would be like. And so I try to be really protective of their personal space. And we are very fortunate that we have tree cover, and that I think really helps. When they're stressed, they just go up into the woods. So that's a great thing for us, is that we have that kind of facility. So I know I'm kind of running out of time. Oh, I'm already past time. Sorry about that. I'm going to quick answer a few more. Susan had asked about whether the pup facility has been chosen for acquisition. They're never chosen. Really, we have source facilities that we look at that we say meet our standards, and that standards is veterinary care, it's standards in USDA reports, it's standards in how the animals are treated, what kind of the management is. So we have some ideas, but really until we have a litter, we don't have, a source. And so we, as we did with Axel and Grayson, we had 3 different potentials, but until we got word that pups had been whelped, that's when we picked the source. So it's an ongoing process. I've been working on it for the last 7 months. It definitely has to be my focus coming up in the next several months. So I'm only teaching I've got the Working for Wolves in May, and then I've got 2 planning for pups May and June. But otherwise, I've got to focus on pup acquisition. So, anyways, so that's kind of where we're at. So Susan also asked about Luna's recovery, and I had hoped to get you a clip from the camera today. She was actually playing with Aiden today. So she has a very large incision. She's been scratching, but so basically Luna's circumstance, if you read on the wolf logs, was a mass that had ruptured. We still don't know what it is. As soon as I know, I will post a log so I can tell you whether it was an abscess, which means that it's a non-issue, or whether it was a tumor, which means that we have got bigger issues. So we don't know right now, but she's feeling better. She's on 2 more days of antibiotics, and we clipped her toenails right to the quick on her back legs, so that if she did scratch, that she wouldn't rip the incision, and she hasn't. Actually, she's scratching. I'm sure it's itching because of the incisions or the sutures, but she is not opening it, and it's not reddish. So it's definitely healing pretty well. And like I say, I had footage. I came in to do wolf care this morning at 8, and at 8:15 I saw her play bound Aiden and just kind of running around chasing each other. So I think she's feeling pretty good. She's still not quite 100% as far as food. We are, we know that's Luna's barometer for when she feels good. So we'll keep you posted on that. Again, staff are here. We're very grateful to Nettie and Steve, who are now watching, I believe, who came this weekend and not only just helped keep an eye on Luna and the retired pack, but it helped us get a few projects done here as well. So, Tammy had asked, are they taking wolves? I think your question, out of the endangered hunting list. I think they're talking about off of the endangered species list. There is a public hearing by the Fish and Wildlife Service. Unfortunately, the announcement wasn't public, nor was the press invited to the announcement. But there is a public hearing, a 90-day public hearing. If you want to comment on that, you can certainly go to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. I will also put a link to the public hearing, so that is in the archives of this webinar, so you can go there and let the Fish and Wildlife Service know your comments about it. So Anna asked, is it ever hard for wolves that enter the pack together if they retire at different times? For example, was it difficult for Luna and Boltz when Luna was retired and Boltz stayed in the exhibit pack? That's a really good question. We really thought it would be, but Boltz, part of Boltz's issue is that Luna was his pack mate, but because she was the only female, she got elevated to a rank of dominant female. Well, he didn't. He entered the male rank order, so he was kind of on the bottom of the male rank order, and she went to the top. So there seemed to be a little bit of a challenge in that, and I have to talk about that, or I have to think about that in my 2020 pups if I want to split up, again, a male and a female pup again, because the female coming into an exhibit where she's the only female, we always are going to have that, where she's going to be no longer a pup mate, she's going to be dominant over that pup. And I think that Aiden, that didn't sit very well with Boltz. And so I didn't see that. But I did think I'd see it with Denali and Aiden, and I didn't see it with them either. So I'm not certain that genetics and brotherhood or sisterhood is as strong as I envisioned. I think that tends to be a little more humanistic kind of point of view, where I think in some cases, and it's important for everyone to recognize that wolves have social rank and they have social alliances that don't necessarily present themselves along gender lines, and they don't necessarily present themselves along genetic lines. And so those are things that in the wild, it's different because it's usually a family. So you usually have that, but families can be not so nice to each other. There's been certainly many circumstances where sisters have caused issues or daughters have deposed mothers. So I think with that circumstance, I know that wolves are social, and I know that alliances are formed. I think sometimes the missing part, while I do believe separation anxiety exists, I think sometimes the missing part is more of us envisioning what's going on is from a human standpoint. I guess that's my take on it. So Tammy asked where we get the pups. Typically our pups are taken are acquired through a captive facility. We don't have anything selected right now, and a lot of times the facilities ask that we don't, broadcast that they provide pups because they don't want people asking them for pups. So basically, what's the circumstance? We don't ask anyone to breed. We inquire if anybody has any breeding that's occurring for other facilities, and then we usually get our name on a list, which is why we might have 3 or 4 different lists that we're on. We also do have, are on a list for Alaska and for pups that are found abandoned. We never take them from the wilds, but in a circumstance where for whatever reason a pack has been displaced and the pups have to be in the neonate stage under 14 days of age, they have a surplus or kind of a list of captive facilities when there's no future for those pups. The Minnesota Zoo I think it was 2015 had 5 pups that were. There was a wildland fire. The den was where the firefighters had laid a fire hose, and it was clear that the mother was not coming back. It was 2 or 3 days, and the pups were clearly at risk for dehydration and death, and they were placed at the Minnesota Zoo. So that has happened. It's happened to a couple of other facilities I know. So we're on one of those lists, but that's a very slim risk, and that's not our usual preference, just because, again, we look to captivity as kind of our source. So I'm not sure who's yipping, Suzanne. That might be Luna. I don't see where the Arctics are though, but right now I'm watching Aiden, unfortunately, lick at his leg on the east side den. That's not my preference there. So it's probably not Luna, because if it's not involved with Aiden, then she's usually got nothing to lip about or yip about. So I suspect it's probably Grayson and Axel over that deer head, most likely. So yes, Grayson was bark howling during that circumstance. So that's kind of where we're at. So I think I'm going to wrap up. So the circumstance with Luna, like I said, I'll keep you updated. She has a wolf log. So right now she is feeding. She's taking antibiotics. It's her 5th day of antibiotics. She has 2 more. We have not seen any weeping from her surgical site. I do not have the biopsy report yet. That was sent out. And so anytime you have something like that, we don't do any of that in-house. We do send it to a professional lab. And here in northern Minnesota, lab results are quite a bit more delayed than you might find in other areas. So I suspect I'll hear something. Tuesday will be a week. I suspect I'll hear by Tuesday or Wednesday. And I'll try to get a wolf posting up at wolf.org on Luna's site so you can know what that's about. But if you're interested, we'll broadcast live from Luna's enclosure on Monday, March 25th is Luna's 7th birthday. So we'll be over on the east side, in the pack holding area, broadcasting there for her birthday. So thanks for joining us. And again, I'll put the video that didn't play here, apologize about that, someday. I hope we have broadband capabilities that allows us to be able to play video seamlessly. And I will put it in the archive. And because it's been, I missed it here, normally the archive goes out to the subscribers, but I will archive it to the other, I believe there's 22 other people that had a single view login. I'll make sure it gets sent to you as well. So thanks for watching. The birthday boy looks great. And he is, like I say, other than that hoarseness, he's the healthiest wolf I ever saw. He literally has no medical issues. We go back to look at his drugging. We did drug him as a 3-year-old because, again, before Axel and Grayson come, or going on 4, we always make sure that he's drugged and everybody's got a clean bill of health. But we're happy that he has no issues. I kind of joke to my students, he's like the middle child. Sometimes we forget about him because there's nothing, we got old issues, we got young issues, but the middle wolf there, he's holding his own as a healthy 7-year-old. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you on March 25th. To you subscribers and anyone else, feel free to join in just by logging into wolf.org and checking out programs and webinars. So have a good night.